I am now recording.
Excellent. Well, I want to really welcome you wholeheartedly to this very first City Case Studies webinar for the YWAM North America Network. The idea came a couple of months ago, particularly after conversation with Chris. This in early summer, in the month of June, actually, Chris came on to the city's network Facebook group commenting about a particular statement that we had put out as the North American Cities Servant Circle. And that created a discussion. And finally, he and I met twice. And although I've known of YWAM Richmond for more than 30 years, since the time of Bob Lixty back in the late 80s, when we were discussing the possibility of creating a North American mobile DTS or SOE with an urban focus, traveling from one city to the next over the years. So we were discussing this 30 years ago. So I was aware of Richmond, but this is the first time, this first summer, where I discovered how long this city, this team had been living in the heart of the city. And I was really, in many ways, unaware of what they were doing. And that was just a beautiful encounter. And I proposed to the City Circle group that we somehow create a context which we could meet with Chris. And the idea came, well, there are other people that we should meet with. And so the notion of having these Zoom webinars tri-monthly to be able to become familiar with one another. And I think this became, even more important in the context of the pandemic, where we were not able to meet in Baltimore last April for our city's conference. And we postponed it till 2/11. But even now, it's in 2-3 weeks' time that we're going to make the decision if we're going ahead with it or not. Will we have to cancel a second time? It is very likely at this point. So the fact that we can't meet together physically in the same location and bond and have conversation and fellowship, well, the idea of being able to meet every 3 months in this kind of format, where we invite each time 3 different guests from 3 different cities throughout North America, including Havana, Cuba at one point. Well, to have these occasions where we become familiar with one another, where we hear the stories from different locations, where we see perhaps similarities, differences, different approaches, particular values that, and spheres in which they are penetrating, that maybe others are not. This is the occasion to become familiar and perhaps to create bridges and encourage networking with specific ministries sharing similar concerns. So I think these webinars have a real potential for our North American Cities Network to draw us ever closer together. So I'm delighted that this is that we're having our first one here with 3 extraordinary guests: Chris Zinchuck from YWAM Richmond, Virginia; Felicia Neely from Boise, Idaho. And Boise actually is a French name called Boise. That's how you pronounce it. Boise means a little forest, a little wood. So she lives in Littlewood, Idaho, where we were supposed to actually, as the city's circle, to meet in early December, and that has been canceled. We also have from Canada, and I think it's good that we do this internationally whenever we have these occasions. And so we have Russ Sanche from Wolfville, Nova Scotia on the East Coast. So it's a good representation. And so the way it's going to work is that Tim is going to lead the conversation over the next hour or so. And in the last 10-15 minutes, I'll come in and just bring out and give the opportunity to some participants to ask some questions. So altogether, this will be an hour and a half total. And so I'll leave it over to Tim right now. And thank you for participating and joining with us. If you have any questions that are relevant to some of the things that are being said, you can put them into the chat line, and perhaps we can include some of those questions along the way. If not, you'll have the opportunity at the end, at least some of you, to be able to ask some more specific questions, whether to the group or whether to a specific guest. And so we'll go forward with that scenario in mind. Tim, it's yours.
All right, well, welcome everyone. It's great to have you all here. I want to welcome Rhonda Peterson, who just logged on to the call, and Vicki Hedgepeth, who just logged on to the call. There may be others that will be coming and going throughout this time. This is really just a relaxed, informal time, although we do have some questions we want to get across and ask. So I'm going to start with Russell Sanche. I hope I'm saying the last name correct. Russell is just gonna have each one of the three introduce yourselves to us, giving a little bit about what your role is and what location you're from and what value or gift mix you bring into your particular location, and any interesting part of your story in just 2 or 3 minutes, if possible. And I'm admitting Christopher Beal into our Zoom call. So Russ, if you can start. And as you start, Russell's mission statement, I looked on his Facebook page and I thought it was worth noting here. He says he's an advocate that partners with other leaders and organizations to see youth live a better life. I thought that was just beautiful. So Russ, tell us a little bit, introduce yourself to us, and then we'll hear next from Felicia.
Yeah, for sure. And I did set a timer to honor, and I think people need to be able to say anything worthwhile in 1 to 2 minutes. So if you can't do that, then you probably shouldn't be speaking. So test me on that. Anyway, my wife's background is really rooted with the King's Kids ministry. And so from a very early stage, back in 1990, our desire was to see an intergenerational ministry launched. We started on the West Coast, not really West Coast, but Alberta, and then returned back to the Maritimes 10 years ago. And so I would say that in those early stages with King's Kids International, our focus was mobilize and equip. And then God had been speaking to us as a ministry internationally that, well, what about reach and care? Are you reaching unreached kids as opposed to just equipping church kids and mobilizing church kids around the globe? And so it's cool that Rhonda is here because she was very intimately a part of all those discussions that we had about that. And so when God said build in your own backyard 10 years ago, we wanted to take that seriously. And so instead of just being out there mobilizing, we thought, what about our own backyard? And so my concern was human trafficking and seeing what was happening in Canada, the US, and also internationally. And so 10 years ago, when as a family, we moved from Alberta to the east coast of Canada, where the highest per capita sex trafficking occurs, and the pipeline is from east to west, then I said, God, how do we build in our own backyard? How do we intercept this flow of kids that are being trafficked from Nova Scotia to other parts of the country or from other countries into Canada? And so it was very clear at the beginning stage that we had to look at youth homelessness. We had to look at vulnerable youth. We had to look at how we would reactivate the entire village to raise the child to adulthood in a healthy way. And it's a big job. And we felt like this is going to be the next 20 years of our life. And we needed to rally and mobilize the community, church and non-church, Christians and non-Christians, to care for the most vulnerable. And so that's what landed us here. So that's kind of background. And I'm at 2 minutes and 39 seconds. So I'll pause at that point.
Thank you, Russ. Very good and concise, and appreciate that very, very much. Felicia, could you just introduce yourselves to us? I know Felicia is the campus director for YWAM Boise, and YWAM Idaho, 1 mission, 3 locations. I thought that was interesting. So Felicia, over to you, a little bit about yourself.
Yes, we are a unique base in Idaho. We're still learning who we are a little bit. But for me, I'll start even back to how I entered into YWAM. I did my DTS in 2014. And right before I did my DTS, I lost my spouse. I became a widow. And when I came into YWAM and the culture of YWAM, it was just this huge open door to do mission with others that I didn't even know I was going to need since my family makeup had changed. I'm also a single mom, so that just YWAM in general, the community of YWAM has enabled me to do so much as a single mom in the lane that I feel like God's called me into, because I have that teamwork and those partnerships that have come around me in my DTS time, and then even in the location where I'm at in Boise. I grew up, or part of my upbringing was in Boise, moved here my high school years, went to college here, and then I went away for YWAM and thought I would be somewhere else, but the Lord had me come back here. And I found out when I returned that Matt and Heidi Keller, some YWAMers that were in Cascade, were beginning campus in Boise. And the heartbeat was to minister to refugees. And it began in 2015, the same year that I returned from my DTS. So I joined in on that at the ground level. And like I said, just it's been a huge open door for me to walk in with my daughter as a family, loving my neighbor, and just the lane that I felt like God's called. As YWAM Boise, our mission statement is through a Christ-centered, Great Commission community. YWAM in Boise exists to serve the city through hospitality, mercy ministry, restoration, and discipleship. And I'll share more about that later, but that just kind of gives an overview of who we are.
Thank you, Felicia. Thank you so much. Your audio is was a little bit rough at the beginning. It's smoothed out a little bit better towards the end. So you might want to just be aware of that. Make sure you're got a good connection there. Chris, could you introduce yourself from Richmond? I had the privilege of teaching at a school in Richmond, and I was just blown away with a large training center that at the same time is engaging their local city in very transformational ways. And one of the things that touched me the most was having dinner or lunch, I think it was, at Chris and Zara's house, and watching the neighbors stopping in or going by and waving at them in the window. And that told me right away that they're not stuck inside of a YWAM bubble, but they're in a city and they're loving it. So Chris, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Tim and Pierre. It's an honor to be here. So I'm from Detroit, and I've been all over the place in my life. I actually moved into YWAM to settle down, if that makes sense. It's kind of a weird thought. But my wife grew up in YWAM in the Richmond location. She was a King's kid, Kara Hirschberger. So if you know Roger and Deanne Hirschberger, their oldest daughter. We got married in 2006. We have 3 wonderful children, Isaac, Hannah Grace, and Jonathan, who just turned 1. And so we are just delighted to be parents. Our oldest son, Isaac, has been diagnosed with epilepsy. And so as a YWAM leader, it's been really a complicated situation to try to work through that and know how to lead with integrity and to release people when your life becomes completely consumed with medical issues. So the wonderful thing about that is, excuse me. Sorry, I'm in a DTS house right now in Virginia Beach. We've really been able to see God's grace and mercy working in the life of our son through prayer and hearing God's voice, and God has been naturally healing him. So that's a wonderful, incredible part of our life. I'm the director of YWAM Virginia. We are similar to Idaho in that we're one base with 2 locations. So we have the Richmond location and Virginia Beach. For my personal gift mix, I am on the disc, I'm a DI. And on the MBTI, I'm an ENTP. So if you know any of those personality tests, I have a lot of ideas. Most people would probably say I'm more apostolic and pastoral. So I'm constantly starting. I love to release young people to do new things. And instead of telling them what to do, I just love to release new things all the time. So you'll see that in the presentation. We have so many things going on, and it's because it's about hearing God's voice and just stepping out in obedience.
Thank you, Chris. And my apologies. I said his wife was Zara. That's my granddaughter. His wife is Kara, right?
Yes, Kara.
Kara, thank you. All right. So if you have questions during this time, you can put them in the chat line, and that would be very helpful. We'll see if we get time to have you to ask your question verbally, but I think getting it in the chat line will help you to formulate the question very, very well. And then Pierre and I will try to help make sure those questions get answered. You can put them in anytime you want. And we may do it on the roll, or we may do it towards the end. We'll just see how things go. Coming back, let's start with Felicia on the next question. And so Felicia, from your location, what's the main ministry focus that you guys have at your location? And what are some of the values or principles that inspires you and your staff to keep digging in?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we minister with refugees in our city, and that kind of developed pretty organically. There were mission adventure teams that came down from Cascade into the city of Boise, even 8 to 10 years ago, and they began to interact with refugees in the city on their mission adventure outreach time. And from that, Matt and Heidi Keller got stirred to actually start this campus here in Boise. And we've, over the last 5 years, seen what are we doing by just going out and doing different things. And some of the main, like I mentioned, mercy ministry, hospitality, restoration, and discipleship are 4 main areas that we go after. Values, though, we value being decentralized but connected. So being decentralized, we live within our city. We have a building as a YWAM campus, but as staff and members, we live in the city strategically. Myself, I live in a neighborhood where on either side of me are low-income apartment complexes, where majority are refugee families that live there. And other family members, or families within YWAM Boise do the same as me. So our goal of outreach is very neighborhood impact focused. And I'm sorry, my internet is unstable, so if I'm lagging, hopefully not.
Okay, Felicia.
Yeah,
Felicia, I'm going to come back to you, Felicia. Your voice is getting cut off.
Neighborhood impact focus, and really what that looked like is we've stepped into these apartment complexes. Some we've had connections when newly arrived refugees.
Sorry, guys, about that connection there. Felicia, I'll come back to you. Chris, if you could pick up from there from Richmond and just tell us what's the main ministry focus of your operating location and the values and principles that inspire you guys to keep digging in to see what God wants to do in that city. And Felicia, I'll get back to you.
Yeah, so we're a unique location in that we are a training center and we are heavily involved in city impact. Our base was originally pioneered to reach into one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the United States. Richmond itself in the 80s and 90s was always one of the top 5 homicide per capita cities in the nation. And our neighborhood and the adjacent neighborhood to us were the most dangerous neighborhoods in the city. We have a lot of low-income housing projects around us. So we have this unique blessing of having now 16 acres of land of wooded forest in the middle of the urban setting. And we can house about 50 or 60 students. And but most of our work is urban ministry, right? We're working in the city. So the reason why we run schools is to train missionaries to do work with us. It's not just, we're not a training center. We don't see ourselves that way, but we see ourselves as an urban ministry that is training missionaries to serve with us. So we just pioneered the Virginia Beach location a couple years ago. And now that location, that's where I am today, is running DTS. We have a Sand and Sound DTS here. And they're into worship and intercession and evangelism over here in Virginia Beach. But in Richmond specifically, this is where we have the urban context. So for both locations together, our vision statement is we inspire and equip people to make Jesus famous. And the idea behind that is, one is the inspirational piece. We want to kind of give people a booster shot of excitement and passion for who Jesus is, knowing him and making him known. But then we want to train them and equip them. So that's where the inspire and equip comes in. We have really wrestled through the value piece through the years. Matter of fact, we had L13 come twice and work with us, an incredible group of folks, and we just love them dearly. They've taken us through a lot of principles. And what we ended up doing several years ago was we put together a series of values. Most of them were YWAM values, but a few of them weren't, that we saw as our values from that process. And after a few years working with it, we began to run into this huge conflict where people were saying, well, what are your values? It's the YWAM values, or these are your values? And we're like, well, they're all, but we like these ones more. And like, we've got us close. And it just became this really big conversation. What are your values? So we went back to pray about it and say, to ask the Lord for clarity. What came out of that was we decided that our values are the YWAM values. Boom, that's it. We're YWAM. We want our values to be YWAM, and we want to do our best to implement all of those values. And then we took these other pieces that we were trying to define as our values, and we renamed them as strategic anchors. And what they became is our strategy for implementing the YWAM values into our city with the 7 spheres. So our strategic anchors are, number 1, we mobilize internationals. Our desire is to, everything we do must include internationals. That's our strategy, okay? The second is church partnership. everything we do, we partner with the church. Okay, so like here in Virginia Beach, our DTS lecture is actually taking place in a church as an example of that. And we have, I think there's about 7 nations representing the DTS here in Virginia Beach today. And then the third thing that is a strategic anchor is what we call know and go, which is to know God and make him known. But it specifically includes Bible study and outreach. And so everything that you would see our base doing is put through those 3 lenses as strategic anchors. So we must do those 3 with everything that we can, with every opportunity we have to reach out. There are times when it doesn't work out that way. For example, in the 7 spheres, which that's really what our heart is in our neighborhood, is to change our neighborhood. We want to see our neighborhood completely change. And it has changed so much since God brought YWAM into Richmond. Now, where we used to be the top 5 homicide per capita rate, we're now falling out of the top 100. And it's completely changed. But like take the sphere of economics, for example. That's a very unique project for us, where Bank of America donated one of their bank branches to the mission. And we were trying to change it into a credit union to provide financial services for the low-income community, because we didn't want the payday loan companies to come in and to really start wreaking havoc economically with a lot of the the residents of our neighborhood. What ended up happening was we kept the building and turned it into a rental property for a nonprofit community health organization called Capital Area Health Network. And for the last 5 years, inside of our neighborhood, we are now owners of a building that is renting out medical services, which gives me authority. And now I'm the president of the business association. So I get to disciple and mentor and demonstrate biblical values to the 40 plus business owners in the area as a ministry with the sphere of economics. So that is an example of one that doesn't meet the strategic anchors, because we're not necessarily partnering with the church. We're not mobilizing internationals, and we're not necessarily know and go every day. But most of all the spheres, we are doing those 3 strategic anchors.
That is very rich, Chris. I appreciate that very, very much. I'll come back to you again. Russ, could you just tell us a little bit about what's the main ministry focus of your location and the values, principles that you guys operate out from your location there? And I don't know if Felicia got back on the line with us. I don't see her. Go ahead.
How's my volume? Is it coming through clearly?
Oh, you sound beautiful.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was, Chris, I really appreciate what you said. And I would say that when I look at, contrasting our core values with the YWAM foundational values, there's some great dovetailing. I'm going to try to share my screen, but if it at all gets in the way, you know what, I'm just going to talk, and maybe there's value. If someone's interested in some of the stuff that I have on paper, let me know. But I think there's 3 things that really stand out when I think about this. As I said earlier in my introduction, my heart was to intercept the flow of youth that were being trafficked, and looking at the systemic issues around why youth are vulnerable, and why we're selling our own children for sex, basically, or slavery related to labor and things like that. And obviously everybody on the call would be just as familiar as myself that the breakdown of the family, the breakdown of the church, the breakdown of the community has definitely fed into this reality that the most vulnerable among us are the most at risk, or the most dependent would be the most vulnerable. So when we landed here 10 years ago, it was like taking all of those things we'd grown and learned and tested and tried, because we were working with leaders. We were doing outdoor adventure. We were mobilizing, groups of youth and families around the globe and things like that. And it was all very exciting. And so coming to Nova Scotia was kind of a humbling process, but a good process. It was like no more flying around the globe, no more teaching for me. It just really shifted. And do I know my neighbor? Do I know my neighbor's needs? Do I know the social worker and the struggles they have, or the mental health worker, or the teacher? And so that's what this journey provided. And so how practical would we get to be relevant in our community? I felt like if I don't know a young person's name and I don't understand the struggles they're facing, that they might be in a vulnerable spot to be sold, to trade sex for a place to stay, which is the reality. We're in rural Nova Scotia, and it's worse in the cities, I think, but it still goes on the same. Kids are trading sex for a place to stay. They're trading sex to fill an addiction, or they're needing to do crime in order to have a safe place to stay, or they're taken advantage of because they're couch surfing and someone's asking them to move drugs or whatever. So when Chris was saying, this was a dangerous place, my heart was resonating with that, in the sense that we could help kids one by one here locally. And we started doing that. And it quickly grew from like 5 kids the first year to like 100, 120 kids in subsequent years. And we're in a small place. I mean, the towns are, 5 to 10,000. And we're in a rural part of the province. So the whole geographic area might be 50,000. But if you're talking 50,000 people and there's 100 kids homeless or couch surfing, that's way too many. That's a problem. So being so practical, we deal with housing, we deal with food, we deal with where you're going to stay, and let's get you back to school and let's get you connected. So we've seen tremendous growth. And I think that when we do something different as YWAM, if we take a good foundation of relationship with God, relationship with one another, and hearing God's voice, and we're obedient, even at a cost. And I'm looking over at Rhonda, and they paid a price for being obedient. So have we. So have others on this call, for sure. And yet, now I feel like I've been more productive this last 10 years than I was the first 20 years in YWAM. I feel like we've got to try and test things and build on the knowledge that we had. And it's truly serving the community. Because not only are we looking after the one and tracking them down and finding where they're sleeping and whether they've got food in their stomach. And at times, I remember my first year here, I would have to tell local drug dealers, don't sell drugs to him, because if you do, it throws off his meds, and then he goes into a full psychotic episode, and it's going to be a mess for everybody, and then having a conversation with the psychiatrist or the police officer, as well as the local drug dealer. And so it's deeply practical, deeply relevant in kids' lives. And you knew their name and you knew their story, and they know you. They know where you live, and they feel free to come over and have coffee or really tell you what's going on. And we got stories written down, all of that. But then in the next 5 years, the wonderful thing is we actually have a platform to speak into the community, and a platform to challenge secular, church, whoever, it doesn't matter, that we need to together see the community transformed. First, is there going to be unity? And all those wonderful principles we talk about in YWAM and we theorize and we see lived out, for sure, but it applies in the same. And so what we've seen just in the last few years is tremendous unity, sharing a vision. I identified the key YWAM foundational values that we see being lived out with less intention, I would say, and more you stumble into it and you realize, oh, we're living that out. You know, we're championing young people. There's servant leadership going on and all those things. But now what I've got is regular phone calls by government saying, Russ, could you help us? Could you be on a province-wide team to look at the child welfare system and retool it with us so that it could actually be effective? Well, that's an easy answer, right? Of course I will. And the call yesterday was, Russ, we have extra money. Could we give it to you so that you could have a housing coordinator across all ages, not just youth? And honestly, we've seen tremendous growth. So when I came here, God said, you'll be like Joseph. I want to give you the king's wealth so that you could use it for my purposes. I'm like, I'll take that any day, you know? And that's what's been happening. And most of our deals with government has been, hey, Russ, would you be interested? We could send you $100,000 a year to do this. Would you do that? And I'm like, yeah, we're doing it anyway. So if you want to give us the money for that, we'll do that. And here it's a conservative church. And, you know, the thing is, there's such differences across the country, and understanding your Christian and church culture and your local culture and your societal culture is super important, because we're constantly translating, right? We're translating from the church to the world, the kids to adults, and that kind of work. And we are working in cross-cultural work all the time. And at the end of the day, may your will be done, may your kingdom come, I mean, can happen because of that sense of unity. Now, when we call a meeting and we say, let's have all the frontline service workers come together so that we can have better work with youth across every sector, they come because they know it's smart. And that unity is where God's commanding the blessing. And in fact, my board of directors is constantly saying, Russ, just slow down and stop saying yes. But honestly, I don't feel like it's me. I feel like it's God opening doors and providing opportunities. At the end of the day, as you read, Tim, from my Facebook thing, it's actually, I think, does depict it well. Is there a chance for the love of God to shine into this kid's life? And is there hope that's being inspired? And do they have food in their stomach? And do they have shelter so that they can see and feel the love of Jesus in everyday interactions with people that are there to represent him, so that they have a chance to know God and join us in making him known? And I'm seeing that happen on a regular basis because people are being faithful to do what they say they're going to do. And that's critical, which as Christians, I don't know if we've always done that.
That's great, Russ. Thank you so much. That's rich stuff that's being said here. If you have questions, make sure you put it in the chat channel. We're still on a roll here. Felicia, are you back? I saw an iPhone come on. I don't know if that was you.
Doesn't seem to be.
Okay. So coming back to Chris, and Russ, I'll come back to you. Just trying to mix it up a little bit. Chris, coming back to you. You started talking about it, and maybe you already covered some of it, but you might want to tell us some more on the transformational impact that you're having in a specific sphere or through your training programs or ministries. You mentioned about the Bank of America. I guess the question that went through my mind, just joking, is did they leave the money in the bank when they gave it to you? But what, tell us some more, because that was so interesting. But if you want to focus on that, or what else you're seeing impact that's really taking place.
Yeah. No, they didn't leave the money in the bank, but they did leave the safe. So we own this really big safe, which is pretty cool, and a lot of banking equipment. But I don't know. I really want to be as transparent as I can on this. What does it mean for us to experience transformation in our neighborhood? And in some, I think when you consider the ideas of gentrification, and are you just pushing people out and changing the neighborhood so it becomes different, or are you changing the lives of people? You know, a city moves, a neighborhood moves, and it's so interesting to see how fast people come and go within our neighborhood. Some people are there for a very long time, but some people come and go quickly. And our strategy has been to really work in all 7 spheres. That is what we're doing. And we do little bits of things in all 7 spheres. And a lot of the things that I think are probably the most powerful transformational moments are things that we probably don't even see. We can look at our neighborhood and we can say, wow, our neighborhood has changed. You know, like statistically it's changed, demographically it's changed. You know, it used to be, we could see, I literally would hear shooting every single day 10 years ago. You could hear the gun battles every day. I mean, there's been days when, I remember one night I took my wife when there was a gun battle in my backyard, and I had to grab her and throw her on the floor and jump on top of her in the middle of the night because I was afraid the bullets were going to come through our house. I mean, I can tell you crazy stories like that. And now that doesn't happen anymore, or very, very seldom. We actually did have a murder in our neighborhood a couple days ago, but considering the fact that we had so many in the past, it's in everything that we've gone through with Black Lives Matter and all the riots and protests and things like that, our neighborhood's gone through a lot of stuff over the last year. So to answer your question, I would say the way that I see the transformation is that I believe our neighborhood has genuinely become the most diverse and friendly neighborhood in our city. And so systemically, as people come and go, all the different initiatives we have flow into that. One of the specific behaviors that we encourage our students, staff, volunteers, outreach teams to do is to recognize every person, to smile at them, say hello. And I think the systemic ministry of honor, which isn't on our ministry list, is actually probably the most transformational thing in the neighborhood. I mean, I can tell you about games you can pray. I can tell you about Potter's Pantry. I can tell you about Miss T's Poppin'. I can tell you about Character Club. I can tell you about the Civic Association and the Business Association. I can tell you about the newsletters that my wife writes, with biblical worldview. I can tell you about Ohana community that we're doing tutoring. I mean, I can share all of these things, and they're all really amazing things, but they change according to the people that are coming to the neighborhood. The thing that has been static, that's truly transformed our neighborhood, has been the spirit of honor. And that comes from being rooted in the nature and character of God. You know, when we understand how much God honors us, and we honor those folks that are around us, they end up coming to us. They want to know what's going on with their marriages, with their domestic abuse. And a lot of the ministry is just happening organically in our houses. So we have our property, which we have 4 buildings on our main property, but then in our neighborhood, we probably have about 15 or 20 houses. So basically our mission is all spread out in the neighborhood. So people are always coming and going and hitting these points of contact. So I want to promote the ministry opportunities and invite you guys to know and understand about them. But I think if you really took a kingdom perspective, I think it's the unity of all these internationals that flow into our neighborhood who genuinely honor everyone there. It doesn't matter what demographic they are, what economic status they are. whether it is the multi-million-dollar developers, which I struggle with them personally, if you want to know the truth, who come in and, my wife disciples the Buddhist lesbian developer in our neighborhood, and like she comes to her for prayer, and so I think the systemic things like this are what really God is doing. It's not us. It's God is moving in our neighborhood with the spirit of honor.
It's so good, Chris. There's a question in the chat from Michael Sweezy. I believe Michael's out of Reno. And he's asking about your 15 houses. I think you said, are they rented by staff? Any comment on that, Chris?
Yeah, some of the houses are base owns. Some of the houses are staff rent, and some of the houses are staff own.
Okay, great. I really appreciate what you're sharing, Chris. I know that your wife has had a big influence with the mayor. I remember seeing her, I think, writing in the mayor's newsletter, or the mayor writing about her, but there's been a partnership, if I remember correctly, in really fighting for your neighborhood and seeing the shalom of that place. Russ, come back to you, unless Felicia's on the line. Felicia, I don't think so.
Yeah.
So Russ, coming back to you, you're on a roll there, and you started telling us more and more about what you're doing, and it's so fascinating, and the depth that's there. Continue on, please, and just expand a little bit on where you're seeing transformational impact.
Yeah, I will.
Go for it, Russ.
I threw this slide up. I think you can see it on the screen, because I wanted to build on what Chris said. And I realized as he was talking, we've got six core values that we really focus on locally. And that thing of respect is enormous. Respect for the youth, respect for the person that you're encountering in the community, respect for the government person that has rules they have to follow. And I think that culture of respect that we have promoted and working together is probably what gave us the doorway to the most productive community transformation. And that's provided the avenue to bring people together, because lots of Christians might be uncomfortable with the reality that it's the transgender young person that is the most vulnerable when they are couch surfing. Well, I don't need to have a conversation about someone's sexuality, their gender, anything, when it has to do with the risks that they're under. I just need to make sure they've got a safe place to stay, and that they've got food to eat and those kind of things. But that kind of respect that Chris highlighted and we've tried to live out gets translated not just from the young person, but to the adult that's also trying to work and serve alongside of us. And so I think that's been the biggest potential impact in the community, is that we have such a sense of unity, such a sense of working together. Of all the places I've worked in North America and internationally, I've never seen such camaraderie and working together like what we have here in rural Nova Scotia. And I think it's the reality. We don't have a lot of money. There's not a lot of resources, so people have one another. And the working together is what's deeply enriching and satisfying. And so it is very much a culture where it's who you know and things like that, but it's not, it's not about favoritism. It's about knowing the right allies to get the job done, and then to roll up the sleeves and get it done together. And so the community transformation to me is we're working with extremes of different communities and bringing them together. And if we're strong and we give good leadership, which is servant leadership, then they can work together. We can make sure that that group can work with this group, because we need one another to get the job done. whether it's housing or whether it's income or whether it's, you know, safe neighborhoods or safe spaces for youth. So I know I'm not being very specific, but that has brought tremendous favor. So somebody wants to solve a problem in the community, it's a real honor that they want to call and say, hey, can I just pick your brain about this? Can I just get your feedback on what are the needs being expressed in this community? And it's a village between 1,000 and 3,000 people, but those people have been living there for 400 years, and that's their home, and that's where they live, and things like that. So what I would say the biggest community transformation is the level of trust for one another, because it's very evident to everyone we work with. We are a Christian organization, and in other arenas, Christian organizations are bypassed and exempt from being at the table. But here now, after 8 to 10 solid years, it's actually the opposite. They're saying, well, can the church participate? Can the church be at the table, and can the church help? And so we become this clearinghouse, or this connector of church and non-churched and liberal and conservative and all these different kinds of things, and bring them all together to say, we've got a community problem to solve, let's solve it, and let's work together. And that they want to give us $1 million to spend on housing, I'm thrilled about that, but it's not us they're giving it to. I have a social worker that will say, when we build this housing, oh, sorry, it's you guys building this housing. And I'm like, no, we are building this housing, us together with you. And you need to have as much ownership over this as we do. And one time I was advocating money for a family interventionist, and the Department of Community Services really liked my proposal. They called me up and they said, we really love your proposal, but we're not giving you the money. We're giving that other agency down the road the money, and they're going to hire a staff person. I said, that's tremendous. I don't care who gets the funding for that position to put that person in place, as long as it's there and we can access it. And that kind of respect for one another really does buy us integrity, not buys integrity, but demonstrates the integrity and buys us favor to facilitate unity and that coming together in the community.
Thanks, Russ. Vicki Hedgepeth is in the chat line saying, I'm so excited about what I see firsthand happening in Richmond and Virginia Beach. Fantastic serving and being available. So good. Appreciate that feedback in the chat line, even as people are speaking. I think it's encouraging to them to hear this. And it's just, what both Russ and Chris are talking about, and Felicia, as we just heard a little bit from her, is just really incarnational presence and the longevity of being in one place and being faithful and working together with others, working with people of good faith, working with people of bad faith, and working with people of no faith, and seeking the common good together for the shalom of their location. So some really beautiful examples. Julia says here, I can't help but wonder how your willingness to partner with and support the good work of secular organizations has created an opening for you as a Christian organization at the table. Sometimes Christians think they are being excluded when, because of willingness to partner, we exclude ourselves. Thank you for modeling collaborative relationships. That is a beautiful way of putting it, Julia. And Julia, out of any of us, knows about networking and working together with people from all different backgrounds, while she keeps her Jesus identity, but puts herself in the trenches of the work. Rhonda Peterson, I'm so encouraged by what you guys are sharing. So proud of you. Yes, this is just the hidden treasures of some of our YWAM locations coming out. Chris, coming back to you, what's some of your biggest obstacles or opportunities, either way, that you're facing in gaining more impact where you are?
I believe that one of the hardest things to gain traction with long term is the transient nature of YWAM. Many folks will come in with a really great vision and passion and drop down, and they're going to change the city, they're going to change the neighborhood. And because of, youthful passion oftentimes, that's what we're releasing, stuff fizzles out. So what I have seen in that is it's the older generation being a multi-generational base location. It's the older generation sticking to things and building their relationships long term that have turned that negative piece into an opportunity. So for example, I'll just brag on, we call her Miss Thelma, and she's now 82 years old. She's been on our staff for 30 years. And I call her our resident Mother Teresa. And she was one of the best athletes in the world in her prime. She played for the South African national field hockey team and softball team. She's shaken hands with the Queen. She was, in her day, the best goalie in the world. And so the Lord, when she got saved, she wanted to go into missions and help young young Black kids. And so she ended up coming to Richmond to serve the neighborhood. And she built friendships and relationships with a lot of the grandmothers in the neighborhood. And if you know a lot about the African American community, it's the grandmother who rules the roost, so to speak, and they run the neighborhood. And she became a real African American because she was from South Africa. She's white, but she moved into a Black neighborhood, and she became the grandmother of our neighborhood. So through all these years, her coaching soccer, her running character club, her doing the tea house, all the different things that she does, she's the constant. And all the young people come in and fit underneath that and do short-term things, and then that works. But where I see that you have a lot of passion, but you don't have a stabilizing anchor, those initiatives oftentimes lead to us even having a negative reputation in the community, because you start something and then it falls apart. And I myself included have done that. I've started stuff and then had to stop it. So I think that a long-term commitment to the people is probably one of the biggest obstacles. And, and I'm not saying that that's not obviously we got to hear God's voice and go where he tells us to go. But as YWAMers, our nature is generally to just send people out. And you can start churning out this large machine of pumping people to go who don't settle down and truly build deep, authentic relationships with the people around them that last.
Yeah.
So your strength is always your weakness, and that's kind of what I'm pointing out. I'm not saying that our model is incorrect, because I love what we do in YWAM, but I think that strength of us as a mission leads to an obstacle.
Thanks. Good, Chris. I love how Joel summarized it there. He says, to paraphrase, passion, needs, an anchor. Love that, Joel. Very good input in the chat line there. Russ, how would you answer that? And then once Russ answers that, Pierre, you want to come on, and maybe there's questions that the group has and you can help feed that. But Russ, how would you look at your biggest obstacle or opportunity to gain more impact in what you're doing?
Well, I think Chris did it again, and that stole my thunder and said it well. I think it's both the challenge and the opportunity, and that's that long-term stick with the plan. And we created 2 years ago a 10-year plan to end youth homelessness in the Valley. And since then, we've asked to expand that it's all ages, to end homelessness across the ages. And it's been done, greatly reduced anyway in the number of cities, but the longevity that takes, and enough people singing off the same song sheet for the longest period of time, is both the opportunity and the challenge. But I want to add a part B, and maybe it causes us to pray, and that's that I really want to see the first 10 years of my ministry. I think I spent a lot of time trying to mobilize churches into, like, to connect with marginalized folks in Calgary. And some did a fantastic job, and some partnered with us, and we had some great relationships with local churches. But now in this new context with a higher intensity and more challenging situations, and certainly a number of our host homes, that's regular folks that take kids into their home, and we provide the support, we provide the finances. The majority are Christians, and there's a wonderful role there for the church. But what I would say is, we're opening a door. I hope churches go through that door. I hope they come along with us and are truly a part of the community that's confronting obstacles, but not confronting it by pointing out sin, but by loving the sinner, and by really being there long-term for their neighbor. And I don't say that with a judgment. I can say the same thing about myself and my neighborhood, my physical geographic neighborhood. So I think if we're around long enough and local church leaders trust us, which I think they do, but they could, practically know how they could partner in their community with marginalized people, poverty, homelessness, immigrants, refugees. And if they need us to help them, to know how to set up a drop-in center or a recreation program after school for youth, we'll show them. I think there is an opportunity, but my heart's cry is, I'm not going to convince them anymore. I'm just going to live it out. But I want to see them be so relevant. So it's an opportunity and a challenge.
Excellent. Thanks. I think this has been really rich. Sorry that Felicia wasn't able to be with us. I know she would have added the whole nother dimension to it. Pierre, some reflections? Do you want to open things up a little bit? We have some time.
Listen, I've just been delighted since the very beginning of this conversation. And I think that this first exercise of the city's webinar, a case studies webinar, has proven successful, and I think will become a model for us for the year or years to come. So this is so I'm really thrilled with how it worked. Two things that really particularly struck me, and I might, after sharing a couple of thoughts, I might turn it into a question for you guys. But I saw on the one hand the notion of honoring, the notion of respect, and I just so love that concept because that is not because this is not a strategy. A lot of what missions organizations do, or YWAM does, is try to strategize. The love and consideration of our neighbor is not a strategy. It's a way of being human. It's a way of recognizing that they are the image bearers of God. It's in a sense it's living out the transformed persons that we are in Christ by acknowledging others, recognizing them for their gifts, for their humanity, because Christ dwells in them whether they are Christian or not, because they are image bearers of God. I push that actually a little bit further than beyond just respect. To a certain degree, I like to suggest that what I try to do and what we need to do as Christians is actually to have a certain degree of reverence for the other. Reverence is to recognize something deeper in the other that he or she is maybe incapable of recognizing in themselves. They might look over their shoulder. He must be talking to somebody behind me. How is he addressing me with such respect? That kind of consideration. And so to acknowledge people and to recognize their uniqueness, to value is to express the value to them. And that builds a space of grace, a space of trust. And all that you've shared about those building of relationships, you know, across the neighborhoods, across town, across your cities with various organizations, secular and church, comes out of that transformation. We go beyond strategy, and I like the humanness of it all. Would you like to add maybe a couple of thoughts on that, either one of you, about you know, what it is to be human beings amongst human beings, what it is to love simply our fellow man?
Yeah. Well, I'm a husband, and I often find myself in the place where my wife doesn't think that I heard her. And I'm trying, but I get busy doing my own thing. And for whatever reason, she doesn't think that I heard her. And sometimes I just don't because I'm doing my thing. And I think that is actually the same reality that we're dealing with in ministry. Are we hearing the folks that we're literally reaching out to? And we've been stuck in the middle of all of the racial tensions in the nation. We are smack dab in the middle of it. And I will tell you that the most important thing to do to break through the tensions is to listen to people's stories. Once you listen, and listening means you don't sit there and hear them. It means you absorb what they're saying and then respond back to them with life. You know, if you truly listen and then you can respond back to the people in your neighborhood with affirmation from the Lord, the compassion of God, the truth, you know, they'll listen to the truth if you listen to them first. And I had a kind of a young white guy who lives in our neighborhood who's, you know, very much an activist. And because I'm a Christian, we had him over for dinner. And we do that a lot. We have people over at our house for dinner a lot, but he and his wife came over, and in the middle of the conversation, he just started cussing me out and yelling at me as a Christian because he grew up in a Catholic parochial school. And as a Christian, I represented something to him that he hated. And I'll tell you what, it really was difficult to sit there. My face turned red because he was yelling and screaming at me in my own house about me as a Christian, as a ministry leader in my neighborhood. And all I'm doing is serving him dinner. But I had to listen to him. And that is not easy. And I think if we want to be a reflection of the Lord, we want to put the respect and the honor and love in, and we want to be able to see people's lives change, we must include listening in the process. It doesn't mean that that's the end all to be all, but I think it's a step that we often forget because we're so worried about getting our strategy accomplished so we meet our 5, 10, 15-year goals so that we can advertise that and tell everybody about what God is doing so that we get money. Sorry, I'm kind of preaching now, but I think we gotta put it in order, you know. If we love people, we'll listen to them.
Thanks, Chris. Maybe Pierre, are there people on the call that want to give some feedback to what you heard?
Yeah.
I'd like to know also who is the iPhone 7 Plus on the call. If you could just tell us your name, that'd be great.
Have we lost Joel?
No, Joel's there.
No, there he is. There he is. I see him. Okay.
And Christopher Beal, where are you coming from?
Hi there. I'm with Jesse. I can do a video.
Hey there.
YWAM Chicago. We're coming from
All
YWAM Chicago.
right.
Great.
Wow,
Hey, Chicago, good to have you with us. Terrific.
Yeah.
Great, good to have you. Any feedback from the group out there or comments that you want to say or, you know,
Questions?
questions?
Tim, I want to make a comment. I'm from San Francisco. I'm with Because Justice Matters. When you talk about honor, BJM, our ministry, has been significantly influenced by that concept. And it started when I read a book by a guy named Danny Silk called A Culture of Honor. And the book is good, but what's really good is the workbook that goes with it, which moves through a process of understanding what that looks like. And I would highly recommend, like I said, the book's okay, but the workbook was helpful to me. You know, it's one of those where everything starts with the same letter, you know, like, and the idea that you recognize who someone is and you respect that, and that you reinforce that, you resource that for someone to be who they are, not who we want them to be or who we think they should be or what task they could complete that would be helpful to us, but who they are. And then we position ourselves to receive who they are. We create a space for somebody to be who they are, and we position ourselves to receive that. And then when we see someone growing into their true identity, who they are, who God made them to be, what their gifts are, then we celebrate that. We rejoice, because it has to start with an R. I recommend that, and enacting and living out that culture in BJM has shaped our entire ministry. As staff, how we treat trainees, how we treat women in the streets, how we treat women in sex work, how we treat the girls we get to know in the Tenderloin. So I recommend that.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Russ. Russ has put the link in the chat line to the book if you want to, are you interested in getting it?
Okay.
If you want to help Jeff Bezos become more wealthy, you can order it on Amazon. And if you don't, you could get it from your local bookstore.
Thanks, Russ.
Which we encourage.
Yes.
Again, that's part of being local and incarnational. Supporting your local bookstore.
Can I share this quick story too, because of something I saw in the chat? Russ had mentioned listening to the elders in the community. So, you know, just recently we've obviously had the elections, right? And, you know, it's very charged on both sides. And there's an African-American leader in our city who's, you know, he's someone who we've allowed speak in YWAM. He loves Jesus. He's with the Church of the Nations movement. He's been an elected official in our city. And when we got right before the election, I was really struggling who to vote for mayor, even though my wife is, you know, friends with the mayor. And we're just, you know, my wife and I were praying about it. And she said, it was her idea. She said, Chris, call Don and ask him who he's voting for. I was like, why am I going to do that? Like, that's private. Like, why am I going to call him and ask him? And I don't want to do that. And she said, you need to do that. I was like, okay, I'll call him. So I called him, and his response was that of tears. That here I am, a younger white person, calling an older African-American in the community to ask him what he thinks about the mayoral candidates was enough to bring him to tears. And he said, you have no idea how much you've honored me today.
Wow.
And it's those type of bonds that when you start adding those links to the chain of relationship, that it truly does transform. It just transforms your city, you know, transforms your area. So I felt like I needed to share that story.
That's great.
That is, Chris, that is That is a fantastic story. That is a fantastic story. What you created was a relationship of trust. You're expressing trust to him, recognizing that this man has something to share with you from his perspective. And so, again, you mentioned the notion of trust, of honor, over the long term, the longevity. And I think that's an issue that we need to be talking about. And I think I see in most of our city ministries across North America and elsewhere in the world, we're more rooted locally. And even if we have training, schools that do, bring in internationals, that do send teams out to other parts of the world, yet there is that grounding, that anchoring locally. Of people who've been there for a certain number of years, building those relationships of trust, that connection locally. What would you say to YWAM? Most of us here are involved in city ministry and we understand these principles, but there might be other people looking at this recording from other locations and bases who are mostly training bases where people come and go. What would you say to them about, and particularly in this context of pandemic, of COVID, where they can't necessarily go anywhere around the world? How would you encourage them to recognize their ministry of training, but also in the context of local anchoring and long-term ministry?
I have really come to the conclusion that the number one thing we should be teaching is how to hear God's voice. Mm-hmm. And, when I came into YWAM and I did my DTS in 2001 in Israel, it wasn't that big a deal to me to think about hearing God's voice as a teaching topic. Mm-hmm. And as I grew in my experience within the YWAM community, obviously my awareness and the importance of hearing God's voice began to grow. And as we've gone into this global pandemic, I'm really seeing so clearly that teaching people how to hear from God on an individual level in their individual specific situation, in their individual relationships with their turmoil and their stress, instead of hearing from outside sources, is probably the most important thing that we can do as missionaries, is teach people how to hear God's voice. And when they get to that place, they're going to hear from God, and the Holy Spirit is going to do the transformation in them that we are praying for. So I think that's the most compassionate thing we can do from a teaching perspective, or as YWAM, especially if you're going to come and go quickly. Teach people how to hear God's voice. Encourage them that God speaks, and it's not just rhetoric. It really is the life of our mission.
Excellent. Russ has written a note saying that he will soon have to leave. Russ, would you like to add another couple of words?
Yeah, I was just gonna, I love what Chris just said, and it's not just because I'm your biggest fan, but I would say yes to everything Chris said, and then add this next piece. And that's, I don't know if we've always, and you don't teach people this, but do we capture a deeper understanding of what it means to love your neighbor? Because when Chris is saying this piece about hearing God's voice, I 100% agree. And therefore, when we hear God's voice, we love God and we know we're loved. But then that piece of loving your neighbor, I think we can give such lip service to it because it's so easy to love from a distance. It's so easy to love in these, high level ways. But love is messy, and love has risk, and love is heartbreaking, and all of that. And so, do we actually give people feedback and affirm that kind of radical love? That means sitting up all night with someone that's stressed out, or, coming off drugs and going through withdrawal, like the really walking out on a day-to-day basis, modeling the presence of Jesus to someone. We don't give each other feedback about that. We don't affirm it. like, I mean, we do. I'm speaking in generalities, but you get what I mean. And I think that it's not just concepts, and it's not just, you know, everybody hugging each other and singing kumbaya and you know, feeling like, aren't we having fun together? That's not love. It's something that costs us, and it's usually time and things like that. So I just put those two things hand in hand, and I think it makes a lot of sense when you think about to know God, make him known, and the vehicle of that is love. But I do need to go. Someone's here to see me. It was fantastic being with you.
Russ, thank you ever so much. Chris, thank you so much. And Felicia, thank you so much. If you are, we'll communicate that perhaps in an email, but really appreciate this. We're going to bring closure to this conversation now. This, as I said, was our first city case studies webinar. We're going to plan another one for February, another one in the month of May, another one in August, and we're going to go around the circle of 2021. If you have any particular ministry or team leader, a particular city in North America that you think we should include, let me or Tim know, and we'll add them to our list as we construct our next webinar in about 3 months' time. Now, part of this is the interconnection. If you want to continue the conversation with, you know, with Chris, you know, with Russ or with Felicia, you can connect with them probably through Facebook, or we can give you their emails. But I think this is a great way to wrap up. Maybe we can just finish up with just a short word of prayer to say thank you to the Lord for this time together. Julia, would you like to do that for us?
There we go. If I can do that without turning myself off. Yeah. Just breathe and be comfortable, everybody. Just sink in a minute. Jesus, thank you. Thank you for teaching us about honor. And thank you for teaching us about stopping for the one. Thank you for our brothers and sisters who've come and shared everything, Jesus, from dinner to banks, giving you buildings. Father, thank you for showing us that you provide, that sometimes you give us Joseph moments, and sometimes we're you know, the Samaritan with the bleeding guy. We commit ourselves, Father, to honor and walk out and be faithful in both those moments. That one isn't better than the other, and one isn't not better than the other, that you give them because that's right for us. And we commit ourselves, Father, to hear your voice and to walk in obedience. Jesus, bless our cities, bless the people, bless those who are unhoused and the runaways and the foster kids and the kids sleeping in the parking garages and the folks selling their bodies for drugs and the single moms and we ask for your blessing to rush, flow, tsunami through our cities. Thank you for these people. Thank you, Jesus. I bless you all in the name of Jesus with boldness and faith and ears to hear. We're not alone, y'all. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for this heartfelt prayer and spirit-filled with prayer, Julia. Great. So we're ending here. Great to have you with us, and we'll see you certainly in between, but in 3 months we have a rendezvous. Speak to the people around you, you know, about how great this occasion was to spark greater interest so that this can be fruitful in the long term. Again, thank you very much. Joel, if I can ask you to stick along with Tim just to talk about